Thank you very much, Marco Cappato, and congratulations to the Foundation of Eumans. I'm very happy to be able to speak here about my experience in assisted dying in Switzerland. I think to have choice at the end of life is something which is very important, as medicine is getting better every day, every year. I think that in 5 or 10 years we will have even better medicine, and the better medicine gets, the more difficult will dying get. Because years ago, people died from a heart attack with a short time of suffering or no suffering at all. Nowadays, as you get very old, you end up with a maybe incurable disease like neurological disease, like a tumor, cancer, and it is difficult to die from such an illness. What do we all want? We all want to have peace. We all want to grow old. We all want to stay healthy. And we should all have the choice to decide at the end of life. I am a family doctor, and I have been working in family medicine with a lot of palliative care for 21 years. I have seen quite a few people die in a way that I wouldn't like to die myself with best palliative care, which means palliative care has its limits. You can't do everything with palliative care. And after 21 years of palliative care only, I had the experience with my father, who tried to suicide himself because he had a second stroke and couldn't talk anymore. He tried to suicide himself and he failed. Then he showed that he wanted to suicide himself by jumping under a train, which I could not accept as a doctor. For me, to do a suicide was a bad thing. To have an assisted suicide was not acceptable then, but to jump in front of a train and to harm other people by doing a suicide. And we have heard in Poland how many young people suicide themselves. That cannot be. So I told my father, I'm going to organize for you an assisted dying, and you can die in peace. When you experience this situation that your father drinks a deadly medicine and then puts his head on your shoulder and falls asleep and dies without suffering, without railing, without any problems at all, then you start thinking, is the work that I did for 21 years really the only good thing? So after 21 years, I started working within choice at the end of life. This means I have also had 2 people who went into starvation to death, which I think is a very, very difficult way, not only for the person who is starving to death, but also for the family members who are caring for these people. But at the moment now, after, it's 15 years now that I have been accepting palliative care, assisted dying, starvation to death, which means the full amount of decisions at the end of life. I have to say these 3 ways are equal, are choice. If people get information, advantages, disadvantages of the 3 ways, palliative care with palliative sedation, starving to death and assisted dying, or euthanasia. So I am happy that I'm still a family doctor, and most of my patients take the way of palliative care. It would be so good if we would have choice and could go the palliative care way, but then decide at the end, if the suffering gets too unbearable, let them go into an assisted dying. What speaks against assisted dying? In Switzerland, we have a law, and you can access to take sodium pentobarbital in a deadly dose. I don't like to call it a drug. I like to call it medication. Like cannabis, for me, is a medication and not a drug. Drug sounds a little bit negative, and I think assisted dying and giving cannabis and other medication at the end of life with unbearable illness, unbearable suffering is so important, because we would like to live in acceptable suffering as long as possible. If we have the possibility of assisted dying, people can cope with suffering much better. We see this again and again. As soon as we give people the green light and they know if the suffering gets unbearable, they can access assisted dying, they can come to Switzerland and die in peace. They live much longer and in a much better life quality, because the fear is not death, the fear is suffering. And if they can avoid suffering, they live much better, they live longer. And 2/3 of the people who receive the green light, which means they are accepted for assisted dying, do not make use of this possibility. Only 1/3 goes into an assisted dying. It's so important to know this. What we all want is live as long as possible, as good as possible, in peace and acceptable health. And why don't we have the right to choose in the end of life and say, now my suffering has become really unbearable, it will not get better anymore for the rest of my life, and I would like to take the choice to end my life now. As a doctor, I have so many good medications. I have antibiotics, I have painkillers, and I do have sodium pentobarbital. If I cannot reduce fear, pain, breathing problems, I do have the possibility to give a medication to a patient who is of sound mind, who asks me, who begs me, please help me end your life. I must have the choice to do this. What is my most important message today? The trip to Switzerland is not the solution. We have a big problem in Switzerland. Switzerland is called the land of suicide tourism. Going to Switzerland means I'm gonna die in Switzerland. But we want people to come and have a look at the beauty of Switzerland. We don't want them to come and die, because they travel in a health condition which every doctor would say he is not fit to travel at all. We have people who come with ambulance airplane in a horrible suffering to Switzerland just to die. Why can't they do this in their home country? It is a human right to have choice also at the end of life. And we do not want foreigners to come to Switzerland. We accept them because it's a human right. And we do like to accept them as long as they can't do it in their home country. But when countries like Italy refuse 2 million votes, 2 million people who say, look, we want this right. If the government refuses, it's the wrong way. The way to Switzerland is always open. The way, like my father, to an unaccompanied suicide is always open. And these are not good human ways. So we need a law. We need a law, or we could have, my dream is that we will have a European law, European guidelines for assisted dying, for euthanasia, and that we have one living will in case of losing the mental capacity. One living will which is understandable, can be European, and can be accepted by all countries. So let's go on with humans, with giving understanding, giving peace to each other, and don't give up. And we will win, I'm sure about this, that we can all have choice in life with peace and at the end of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Erika.